everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining the show for the 100th time is Brad Spielberger, formerly of PFF, but now, hold on, I got to check the Twitter bio. Grand Central Sports Management Director of Football Administration, and they're still letting you come on my podcast. I'm very happy about this, Brad, that you can return. How is the new job? How are we doing?
Yeah, we'll see if this episode makes it to air after it goes through compliance and corporate gets its hands on it. But no, it's great to be back. Happy to be here. I'm also in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania now. So I know the setup behind me looks pretty much the same, but it's just the same posters in a different room. But no, it's been cool, man. It's been good. We've been doing a lot of cool stuff. The agency side of the biz is fun. It's interesting. It's different every day. There's funny anecdotes and whatnot that I'll probably tell you off air, but yeah, it's as silly in some ways maybe as you hear, but I think in a lot of ways it's actually very, very like, I don't know. It's cool to see to be able to help young men's lives and do this. The good side of the business is as good as it gets. I'll put it that way.
Okay, so what does a director of football administration do exactly?
Yeah, so I am the contract negotiator for every agent here at Grand Central Sports. So obviously, I think when I say that, some people are like, "Isn't that an agent's job?" I mean, yes, to a degree, but there is so much more that goes into that profession. When you're traveling around, pretty much at any point, you could be on a flight, including during the outage, the data outage from a couple weeks ago. When one of our guys was stuck in Laramie, Wyoming, which I joked was maybe the worst possible location to be stuck in, which I stand by. No offense to the folks in Laramie.
We have a big listenership there. You just ruined it.
I know I know you probably have some sponsors and a good listener hub in Laramie, but no. So there's travel, there's marketing, there's dealing with a million other things, and so yes, all of our agents are fully capable and have experience negotiating contracts, but even some of the big name agencies also have director of football administration roles or whatever, and it's just contract nerds that are preparing for negotiations, that are doing valuation work, that are doing market research and analysis to, because again, making a difference of a couple dollars here and there in the long run is going to add up for not only the company ourselves, but also for the players. So yeah, I'm the contract negotiator and strategist is essentially what it is.
Okay, so not that long ago, you and I did a mock negotiation. How similar was our mock negotiation to your actual negotiation?
Very dissimilar in every form or fashion. Well, look, I haven't negotiated a market setting Justin Jefferson highest paid non QB in the NFL deal yet, but yeah, I don't want to get into. I guess it's obvious who I'm kind of speaking of. But it's just I would say this like. I don't think there's as much like back and forth quibbling on the phone, or I guess in person would be the corollary that we did. It's more, I think, on the phone or on email or stuff like that. Yeah, I think you kind of picture like two guys sitting in a room, like hammering things out and going back and forth. Not really how it goes in my experiences thus far.
Well, that does make for better content, though, if we can fight back and forth as we did. And, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't remember right offhand where we landed in that contract negotiation, but I think that we were pretty close to where Justin Jefferson actually ended up with his dollar figure. He ends up becoming the highest paid wide receiver in NFL history by 50 miles. And yet, when you look at the contract and the way that it's structured for it being as expensive as it actually was, I don't think in comparison to quarterback contracts that it's actually comparable at all for how much the team is going to have to work around it, that for Justin Jefferson's value and what he brings to JJ McCarthy for the future, I thought that the deal that they ended up hammering out with Justin Jefferson turned out to be fine. It's a lot of money for sure, but there wasn't any world where the Vikings were going to walk away from that one and go, oh, good deal. Yeah, we really got one over on him. This was not a Danielle Hunter situation, but give me your breakdown, your analysis of Justin Jefferson's contract and how it worked out for the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple reality, as we talked about, is yes, it's low-end quarterback money, but when your actual quarterback is, the 10th, 11th, whatever it was, overall pick, and is making now kind of even a discount even for a rookie deal, which I know sounds silly, but go look at those contracts, folks. And Caleb Williams probably making $40 million over 4 years. Well, JJ's probably what, 25, 26? I should know that, but it falls off pretty precipitously. So yeah, I think the big thing you and I talked about is what was happening was the term. Is Minnesota has been very, very hell bent, and I shouldn't say just them. It's a thing across the NFL, and we'll get into it a little bit. But their precedent was always 5-year deals. And you just referenced Daniil Hunter. Him and Stephon Diggs signed the exact same contract at the exact same time. Or maybe not exact same, but very, very similar. And in both of those situations, yes, the Vikings won by a mile. They clearly, again, it's a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick versus a 1st-round wide receiver that has immediately become one of the greatest to ever do at his position versus some guys in Diggs and, Hunter that kind of were clearly better than they were expected to be as prospects, but they weren't, setting records out of the gate. So, yeah, 4 years is still better than 3, which was very much a reality, right? A lot of receivers have signed these 3-year deals. So I would say Minnesota being able to finally say, you want 3, we want 5, 4 years, shake a hand, and we'll move on from there. I would imagine that was the longest holdup of the entire conversation. I don't know that for a fact, but I would guess it was. So I would say it's great to get there. And then, yeah, I mean, you're going to give unprecedented money. You are going to give Nick Bosa plus money. I think we kind of referenced that contract as well. 34, 35 million. His was on a 5-year deal. So you get down to 4, but you're seeing still more and more receivers getting paid, in the $30 million range. So I think it's a win-win for all parties. It had to get done, and it did.
Okay, let's dive into the nitty gritty of this, though, and how the cap hits shape out and what they're going to have to do in the future. So for this year, they only have an $8.6 million cap hit for Justin Jefferson. That's pretty nice for the NFL's best wide receiver. And then next year, 2025, still only $15 million. And this is, even when you look at the Trevor Lawrences or the Jordan Loves, a lot of what teams are able to do is push those bigger cap hits down the road. And when it reaches 2026, then it goes up to almost $39 million. But they should be able to restructure it. Like, explain to me how we get this. Like, how does this happen that they're able to do it this way, to have only a $15 million cap hit for next year, which allows them to go into free agency and spend what they want, and then how they will deal with it when that cap hit does go up to $39 million.
Yeah. So, we talked about it's a 4-year deal and there was one pre-existing year. So you do have 5 years to work with in the original, a year of the new contract overall. By that, I mean 2024, right? So if you add 4 onto 1, you have 5. We know you can maximum proration is 5 years in advance. So you can only spread cap hits over 5 years. However, they did add a void year in 2029 so that they get also that option bonus for $30 million that's due next year is also getting max prorated. It's getting split $6 million in each of the 5 years remaining. And yes, one of those years is a void year or a dummy year. But that's how you enable that. And I do think it would be fair to look at this originally and say, hey, well, if McCarthy's cheap, why wouldn't they front load this a bit more? And I think the rationale is actually, if he's cheap but he's good, then we want to go spend on more players, right? Because then it's like, all right, we have a window, the classic cheap rookie contract quarterback window. I don't know if anyone expects it this year necessarily. I think, and maybe we'll get into that at a later date, but I think Darnold starts the year and then we see how things progress. But if McCarthy turns it on in his 2nd or 3rd season, you want those lower cap hits potentially, in theory, so you can go add free agents on defense or, what have you, because then, as we saw this offseason and as we're going to get into, quarterbacks are not waiting to get paid. If you've shown any flash of anything after 3 or 4 years, you're probably going to be top 10 in the market, even if, you can quibble with if the player is worth it or not. That's going to happen. So I don't mind having these cap hits be pretty low in the years where maybe they do feel like, okay, we have a window we want to attack, and then we'll kind of reset the books again in 2027, that range.
Well, and they can start pushing all those buttons that they did so much to keep the team together in 2018 and 2019, and then they ultimately paid for it. But what the Vikings are trying to do is win in a certain window and you'll pay the bill when it comes, but you're going to open up an opportunity here. Explain what they can do when it does get there, 2026, because I look at year 3, especially with young quarterbacks, as unless you have Patrick Mahomes, where we often see that big jump, especially from younger quarterbacks. Josh Allen was an example of this. Guys who are talked about in the same way as J.J. McCarthy as raw players that are still ascending and developing. He will, in 2026, I believe, still be younger than Michael Penix is right now and Bo Nix is right now. But what can they do there? Like, how does that work? How do you just, because I think the way we talk about it is, well, they'll just kind of do the thing and they'll, push whatever Excel sheet, and then the cap hit won't be the cap hit. So what will they do exactly?
I think what you do there when you set that up, that balloon payment, so you're saying that the 2026 cap hit is $39 million for Jefferson after 8 and then 15. I really think it does, in my mind, kind of get dictated by how J.J. McCarthy plays, where if you have a lot of groundswell of support and belief going into that third season, let's say he has a great second year, and you say, all right, this is his potential last cheap year, and we think he's good enough, and we think the offensive line looks good, Jefferson looks good, everyone has their head on straight, and the team's looking good, and the defense, is playing good ball. Then I think you would say, all right, we're going to restructure this money. We're going to take this $25 million salary that we owe Justin Jefferson, and we're going to split that out over the 4 remaining years, or even go back to him and ask, hey, let's add another void year on there so we have 5 years to split this thing out. Obviously, you keep a minimum salary, $1.25 million, and then the rest of that $25 million all gets spread out over however many years you want. So, in theory, you could clear a whole bunch of money, maybe $18+ million off that number. So that is the potential approach. If you're saying we want to spend, we want to add, like, here's the example. Like, let's say you're the Texans, bring in Danielle Hunter. You do the equivalent. You're the Vikings. You're pretty good. There's this 30-year-old edge rusher that makes it to market who you think, all right, we're going to sign him to a 2-year contract for $50 million because we're going all in right now. Like, you do the same thing. As obviously the other team in this example. So if not, let's say McCarthy is like, all right, we're not really worried about he's going to break the bank or anything like that. Maybe you let Jefferson's cap hit stay at that large number so you don't make it even harder to deal with later on. And you say, all right, like, just pay the full money on the cap and in cash, of course, this year. Because we might be trying to figure out what we're doing going forward, and we don't want to, add to the burden in 2027 and beyond. So it's kind of like this inflection point or this kind of, you might make the decision based on how you feel about the roster going into 2026.
So they've given themselves a little bit of flexibility there. I also wonder what the salary cap is going to be at that point after Amazon buys the entire NFL and pays $7 gazillion. And then Jefferson will be making 1% of the salary cap or whatever. And there will be some other receiver who's making $100 million a year. That's honestly, it sounds ridiculous. That's kind of what's happened over the last maybe 5 years with the salary cap. And the next contract we're going to talk about is really maybe evidence of how good that can be if you sign someone to a longer term now. But it has made this massive leap, which I think is the reason that you see quarterbacks getting to $50 million. But Christian Darrisaw, when he signed, and I got to look at the full contract, our friends overthecap.com, shout out to Jason Fitzgerald, who I keep trying to email to get on the show, doesn't respond to my emails. Maybe you can help me out there. I can't believe this Christian Darrisaw contract. I truly can't, because he signed it early. He could have waited until next year. My expectation was that he wasn't even going to talk with them really about it, and they were going to do the same negotiation because Jefferson was such a rare situation. And then these cap hits, $10 million next year, $23 million in 2026, $24 in 2027. I mean, by that point, he's going to be a middle of the road left tackle as far as am I going over the top to say that this has to be one of the best contracts for a player of his caliber in the league?
There's two fascinating elements that occurred this offseason that both play into Christian Darrisaw in favor, I suppose, of the club. So first, well, I guess it's good for players too, the first one, in that And we probably talked about it with Justin Jefferson, and he probably now, in hindsight, would love for this to have happened last year. But you and I talked about how it was very rare for a non-quarterback first rounder to get that extension done after 3 years, because teams would always just try to wait until after the fourth year because they had the fifth-year option. But those players were sitting there saying, okay, so I'm being penalized by not getting taken later because all my buddies that went in the second and third and fourth round, they are getting deals done after the third year because, of course, there is no fifth-year option. They're going into the final year of their contract. So that had been the case forever, where there were like one or two non-QB first rounders. You know, we mentioned Colton Miller, I think, on the show. This past offseason, the first rounders and their agents clearly said enough. Like, we're not doing this anymore, and we'll see if it continues. But, you know, Penei Sewell obviously was first, and he's relevant at tackle, tying back into Christian Darrisaw. But, you know, Sewell did it, and now, of course, I'm blanking. But there were probably 5 or 6, 7, 8, like, first rounders from, I guess that would be 2022, that have already signed extensions, and I'm not talking quarterback. Of course, that year, the only quarterback in the first round was Kenny Pickett, who I think is in a camp battle for the number 2 job in Philadelphia. So he obviously was not going to get extended. But yeah, so that was the first big one. And frankly, teams should always try to go as early as possible. We talked about. But then second, I haven't seen an article about it yet, and maybe I should feed it to someone who I used to work with or love in the analytics community. But I think we now have enough evidence to say that we are seeing a change in the tides where, and this goes back to like our buddy Eric Eager and stuff like that, that the offensive line is being viewed as a unit that is a weak link proposition and a weak link system. And yes, tackles are still going to make more than guards. And yes, left tackles probably will still narrow the edge right tackle. However, I think all the money across the board is going to come closer together. Where, I mean, center is still miles behind. Center is probably the most underpaid position in the NFL. And Creed Humphrey needs to change that in Kansas City for everyone's benefit. But left tackle and right tackle are being more and more kind of just blended together. And then now even guard is, again, still going to be below, but it's not going to be tackles making 35, guards making 15. It's going to be tackles making 28, guards making 22, right? Like that's kind of the current example right now. So I think both of those things happened. And then the Vikings were able to say, you're not going to get Penei Sewell money. You're not going to get Tristan Wirfs money, but we'll go just below that. And yeah, we'll do a 4-year, not a 5-year, which again, so first we talked about team-wise. Some teams are hell-bent on 5 versus 4. Minnesota used to be. But also, if it's a guy with 2 years left on his deal, you're going to be more malleable to, okay, we'll go 4. We have 6 total years of control. That I imagine was more palatable to them. So yeah, everything lined up really, really well. He's a phenomenal football player. I think the tackle market, like I was underwhelmed by what Sewell and Wirfs and I guess Darrisaw did. I don't know how we don't have a $30 million a year tackle if you're going to take 4 or 5 years. Like Wirfs in particular, I really just struggle to see what kind of went down there. And again, this is where I'm getting into muddy waters. If you had me on one as a PFF, I would say more. I just don't really know what happened with the Wirfs conversation. So anyway, that's all that happened there.
Well, it's nice that you've learned dancing since you've changed the job, but I'm actually just thrilled that we could still have Jan to bring as much insight as you can. So I do appreciate that. But Christian Darrisaw is a Minnesota Viking under contract until he's 30 years old, which is just pretty wild that they were able to get this done. And his cap hit when he's 30 years old in 2029, this thing never goes over a $31 million cap hit. And there was somebody, I can't remember who it was, so I apologize for whoever had this theory. But we analyzed positional values so much. And whoever it was that I was listening to, a bunch of different football podcasts, suggested that maybe the team that just gathers the most elite players, regardless of position, is probably going to have the best chance. And with Christian Darrisaw, now you know that you're going to have one at left tackle, and you could probably quibble over maybe the value was more previously when there wasn't as many freak edge rushers who came off the right side or whatever. But to have him at this price 4 years from now, you know that guys are going to be making a lot more. So I think this is a very favorable deal for the Vikings from their side, maybe just in comparison to Jefferson, where they knew they were going to have to pay top-notch money, and down the road, you're going to have to deal with that. With this one, there's not exactly a whole heck of a lot to deal with, which does bring us back to, as you have alluded to numerous times, J.J. McCarthy and his contract now versus the highest paid quarterbacks, we have gone from when Kirk Cousins signed for $30 million a year, we were like, oh man, that's a lot of cheese. I don't know how they're going to work around that. And of course, the cap was lower. Kirk always signed short-term deals, so you couldn't spread it out very much. And you always had big cap hits for him, which was part of the problem. But JJ McCarthy is going to make like $5 million while Jared Goff makes 55. What do you make of the ever-growing gap between the guys who have gotten paid, or let me put it this way, what do you make of the advantage that the Vikings have, which seems to be ever growing, from having a first-round quarterback?
Yeah, we did probably talk at some point about the growth of a middle market at quarterback, which I think if you can get the right guy, which is more like a guy over 30, like a Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, like that realm of player, kind of like I guess a Russell Wilson, if he didn't have the whole, kind of silliness with his old deal in Denver, like I think he would have fallen in like a 2-year, $50 million type of situation. I think that market is becoming more of a thing. But at the end of the day, it's still a situation where if you are a young rookie contract quarterback and are even really just like starting with like some reason for positivity and upside. So if you're a top 20 guy, you're going to get top 10 quarterback money, no question about it. Like, I'm not even here to say like, I think the anti-Tua narrative probably has gone too far to a degree. I think Jordan Love looked incredible last year. Yeah, it's a small sample size. Yeah, it's probably scary. But I think intangibly, you can't get around stuff like that where if you were to say, well, you haven't played enough, you'd say, okay, so should I have asked for a trade on draft night when you drafted me to be Aaron Rodgers' backup? Like, what are you saying you haven't seen me play enough? Like, whose fault is that? Mine or yours, right? So, but like with a Jared Goff, for example, I understand that he's coming off a great season. I'm not trying to be a Jared Goff hater. Okay, he had maybe the best offensive line of football. You just made his left tackle a $20 million man, and his right tackle basically has the best deal of any tackle in football now. If you really got into the weeds of it. His center is a top center in the NFL. His guard who just left got $17 million a year from the Rams. Anyway, so long story short, you have all of that. Again, the weapons haven't been incredible. They've been solid. Amon-Ra is obviously a great player, yada, yada. It's just, you saw this happen with the Rams. They made a Super Bowl. They gave him a bunch of money, and then they couldn't sustain the rest of the roster around it. And you kind of just did the exact same thing, and you paid everybody else, which they should. Like, it's been cool to see. Lee McNeil should get $20 million a year too. But it's just, I don't know. Like, it's so hard as a club to not do it because you can make an NFC Championship game. And that's, and they should have won that game. They definitely should have. And yeah, they beat the Chiefs in week 1. So maybe they can tell themselves, like, that team was good enough to win a ring. And maybe they were. But it's just, I don't know. You get yourself into a corner where you can't get out of this deal and you just have to pay the guy. And it's great. Look, I'm on the player side. I love it. It's good. I keep it going, keep it rolling. It's just tough on the team side. Like, if you don't think the guy is top 8 or top 6 or whatever, you probably have a lot of trepidation doing it, but you also know you have no choice, and they don't. And to be fair, they should. I mean, quarterbacks are having a top 20 quarterback in this league. It makes every Sunday at least worth watching. And that's kind of all you can ask for as a fan. You're sitting here with a Vikings and Bears fan. I would love if the Bears had a top 20 watchable quarterback at any point in my life. I'm not sure we have. So it sounds dope.
I mean, there's been several games where there was one where Kyle Orton against the Vikings threw for like 450 yards. There was that one single game that happened, I think maybe 16 years ago. So it's possible. Yeah. To your point, though, I think that a lot of teams have run into this same conundrum. Now, I don't put Jared Goff exactly in the same category as Trevor Lawrence or Tua because both of them have not really come anywhere close. You get a single playoff win that they had to come back from 27 points for the Jaguars, and then Miami has lost in the playoffs when Tua has gotten them there, whereas Jared Goff has actually taken a team to the Super Bowl. And I think that the way that all of these teams have to look at it, whether you have the rookie contract with McCarthy or if you have Jared Goff, is always about windows. And what Detroit did was they drafted so well over the last couple of years that they've had manageable contracts around Jared Goff. That will eventually change. But what their hope is when that changes, they've already won a ring or they've already made a Super Bowl appearance by the time that this thing gets untenable because of all the contracts. And you could say, well, I don't know if Jared Goff is good enough to get them there, but NFC Championship and a Super Bowl, top 5 offenses 4 different times. I mean, I think that one makes a lot more sense in my mind, or is a lot more likely to work, put it that way. Like, I get why Trevor Lawrence would be signed by the Jaguars. And when Tua didn't play, how did that look when he was not the quarterback? When he was banged up, it looked pretty gnarly. So I think people underrate him a little bit too, in the same way with Goff. It's just, we kind of can't live in this world where the only guy who gets paid is Mahomes and Josh Allen. Like, other teams are going to have to find ways to do this. But I think that what the Vikings have now is, if JJ McCarthy turns out to be good, they have all the advantages that we talked about them for years not having because of Kirk Cousins. And if you look at their overall setup with the salary cap for the next 2 seasons, they should be able to go into free agency next year. And your agency should be calling the Vikings for every player you got, saying, I've seen your cap space. How do you think that they should use this advantage in the future? Because they did some of it this year with Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman. They signed these guys to multi-year contracts and, of course, the extensions. But if you're taking a roster that's 2/3 of the way there and is trying to do everything you can to maximize your first-round quarterback when he's cheap, what's the next step for them roster-wise?
Yeah. So just real quick, tying it back to like the quarterback market as a whole, like that's what we're hearing about, a potential cap or, like a NBA max, like, which conversation for a different podcast, but it just, like that position just grows and grows and grows, and there's just no stopping it at any point in time. So
do you think, I'm sorry, but you bring this up. Do you think that there would ever be a separate quarterback cap? Like a separate contract for, because you might think it sounds ridiculous, but they do it for rookies. They have their own separate contracts. Would there be a levels type of thing for quarterbacks and then the rest of the salary cap? Could we ever see that split? Would players want something like that?
So I can tell you that it was discussed, probably not in earnest. It was discussed like during the negotiations for the last CBA. I imagine kind of more just like thrown around as like an idea, where the teams that were paying a ton of money to quarterbacks, we thought it was like impossible to compete and like an unfair advantage for all these teams with the cheap quarterbacks, which I again just think is insane. Not just because I'm a Bears fan, just because also you do research. Like, yeah, there's data behind Super Bowls won by rookie contract guys or making the Super Bowl. I get that. Look at the conference championship participants of the last decade, and all you see is a list of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, I have zero sympathy for that approach, and I get the argument. I think it'd be a bad thing. Personally, I struggle to see why teams would say, because their constraint is more so cash than cap, right? We know that. We talk about the cap, and then of course it influences things. But in my mind, I don't know how it would work. But if quarterbacks are separate and like they can make gazoodles of money, but it impacts the cap less, the teams are not going to give the more money to other players at other positions. They're not. They're going to say, well, but like there's always going to be some excuse and some rationale and some reason why they can't do it. So I just struggle to see why it would benefit other position, other players. If it does, then yeah, I mean, selfishly, I would support it. Until we rep a quarterback, then I would say it's bad. No, but yeah. So it's just to me, it's like I don't see how the downstream effects would actually be positive for other players. I think it'd be pitched as that, which is what the NFL does, what the owners do. Oh, this is going to benefit you all in X, Y, Z ways, and then Jason and I write an article 2 years later about how actually the outcome is and the externalities are all negative and it actually backfired and yada yada yada. So anyway, back to the Vikings. I think the thing I come back to a lot is like free agency still at the end of the day is about plugging holes and filling depth at non-premium positions in the middle tier markets. Like I still don't want to be chasing the top of the line players. It's just based on data and results and just how it's gone. And sure, there can be, rare situations and circumstances where maybe it just lines up perfectly. But yeah, so, I mean, just using the Vikings as an example, you have a good year, let's say, but you're okay. Let's just go sign 4 corners. None of them, we don't think any of them are number 1 corners, but we think we legitimately are going to sign a CB2 through CB5, and then just like let three of those, just let that work out, or the guard spot, whatever. They obviously have some decent depth there now, but yeah, I just do the same thing I've always said. And then still just enable yourself to draft whatever you want for a long term or for a higher ceiling or for premium position, whatever, because you're just saying, all right, we're not trying to fill our safety 2 or safety 3 hole because we just went out and signed 4 safeties. The most was for $5 million a year. The lowest was for 1.5 a year. But we have a bunch of starting caliber players at a non-premium position, and so we can focus our efforts on other things come draft time.
The positions that the Vikings are going to need to address, I think, are hard to fill without getting a premium player. And what I mean is defensive tackle and corner. I mean, you could say that for anything. Of course, I want a premium player at every single position, and then I'll look like San Francisco in their roster. But defensive tackle specifically, I found it really fascinating. I think you tweeted this out when you were still allowed to tweet, which was about how almost all of them who have gotten paid have been first-round draft picks. And I completely understand why that is. The first-round draft picks are going to be the physical freaks who can overwhelm offensive linemen. They're going to be the quickest, largest, fastest, and it's so much of a physical position that they're going to stand out. And when you do get a Christian Wilkins hitting free agency, that man is going to get paid an insane amount of money, but there's also just one of him in free agency, and there might be no other guy. What DJ Reader is good, but I mean, the drop off there I think is significant between those two. There might be one guy a year because teams get these guys and they keep them forever because they're a cheat code to have a defensive tackle like that. The Vikings had it with Kevin Williams for many years. And at the cornerback position, that's one that's, I think, trickier because cornerback, looking at the data over the years, seems to rely a lot on a few things. I mean, one of them is your scheme, who's calling the plays for your defense, who's on your defense, how much pressure you're able to create impacts how the cornerbacks play, and also what wide receivers you end up facing. So even identifying by using the data which guy is elite and worth paying and how he's going to transfer. Was it Tremaine? Was it Johnson?
Yeah, Rams, Tremaine Johnson.
Right. Yeah, right. You see this all the time where a guy has one great year and then everybody goes, oh yeah, this is the elite corner we were looking for. Here's $7 billion. And then the guy doesn't fit and isn't any good. So I think from the Vikings perspective, they have two of the trickier positions to evaluate in free agency and to even decide which one you want to go with in the draft next year if those are the spots they're looking at.
Yeah, for D tackle, outside of a Wilkins, which was a pretty rare circumstance, and then again, good player, but like that contract to me was kind of insane. It's what you had to do. I have no doubt the Raiders were bidding against other teams. Like I don't think they got duped or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. It's more just like, I mean, you gave like tier 1 pass rusher money to a guy who doesn't really rush the passer all that well. But again, very, very good player. And I have no doubt that was the market. It's just, was that an efficient market? Different question. So you don't find tier 1 defensive tackles, and I still would say he's tier 1. They don't exist in free agency, right? And that was what the conversation was about too, is the scarcity there. I mean, it's simple planet theory. Like there are fewer guys walking around that are physically capable of doing what those guys are physically capable of doing than there are edge rushers. And that I think is underrated in the conversation of premium position, all that. It's not just the on-field value, against the market, yada, yada, but also what is the availability of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and even in some cases a tier 1 player. Look at the last 5 years of free agency. There's a lot more edge rushers or even trades. There are teams more willing to trade those guys. Like if you find a premium talent defensive tackle, that guy is retiring in your jersey. That's just how it's been. Or you're choosing to let him go, not vice versa, right? So corner is super tricky, and this is also another fascinating. I mean, the fact that safety is making more than corner now is, again, like contract nerds, is like the talk of the town. Like, and no one cares. There should be like a long form article about it from like ESPN, but like no one kind of is as fascinated by it as myself and other nerds in this realm. But it has become so hard to find a player at that position that year over year can be consistently very, very good. That again, like can make it to the age of, like Jalen Johnson coming 3 years after a Jair Alexander on the market and not even getting close to topping him for highest paid at the position. I mean, truly not even close. L'Jarius Sneed's an older player, and there are issues that sounds like with his knee. It was the report, I think, but still, getting traded for fairly decent money, not even coming close to $20 million a year. It's fascinating. I mean, that market is stagnant. It is in a standstill. I don't like maybe AJ Terrell gets close. I don't know. Are we just waiting for Pat Surtain and Sauce Gardner and some of these guys to come up? Like, and then are they going to push it to like 27, $28 million from 21, 22? Like, it's so when you get back to free agency, for me, the teams that I thought approached it the best are the teams that just, again, like they sign guys that are like, all right, this guy is at least like playable. Like, is he great? I don't know. But again, we're not trying to like critique teams, but like there were some guys that signed this year that are 28, 29 years old, coming off injuries that got paid like upper middle tier money. And I just think the downside risk of that is so massive. Like giving 11, 12, $13 million for a guy that, yeah, he was good in 2022, but like he had a significant injury. He maybe didn't play all that well. He may have benefited from a heavy zone system, and now you're bringing him somewhere where maybe you play more man and do different things, more match coverage, whatever the case may be. Like that, to me, it's a risky proposition.
Well, and if cornerbacks were part of fantasy football, we would talk about how they hit the age curve every bit as hard as running backs, it seems to me. Even use Xavier Rhodes for an example. And there's more older corners who've succeeded like Patrick Peterson, but not that many. Once they get to about 28 years old, 29 years old, they start to drift off. Xavier Rhodes was the top of the line cornerback in the NFL for all of about 2.5 seasons. And then he wasn't. And this happens over and over and over again. And hey, no surprise either. And this is no disrespect to him. Great, great player. And he would island guys, which you don't even see anymore. But also, they had the number one run defense, the number one pass rush, the number one, right? They had Everson Griffin, Danielle Hunter, all these great players around him. So if he just did his job, he would do pretty well. And with a lot of corners, there's so many factors that just go into how you end up playing that I think it's hard for teams to even circle someone. And I had, in the process of writing my book, a general manager say to me, people criticize PFF's cornerback grades. We don't really know how to grade them either. Some of the time, like from year to year, or predict how they're going to grade from season to season. And that's the difficult part. And yet for the Vikings, they need them to be better. So I think it's almost like this. It's almost like a baseball team with a bullpen, where you just keep guessing until you get it. You keep drafting them, you keep signing them, and then, Tommy throws 104 and he got lit up with the Mariners, but with the Twins for no reason at all. And it might just be small sample. No one can hit him. And then you try to ride that as far as you possibly can. It's a very, very tricky thing if you don't grab one of the 4 guys who are excellent long-term. One more. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, it's the second hardest position in football, I think, behind quarterback. I really do feel that way. And so, like, it's just hard to be consistent. And the ones that are, they deserve all the money in the world. And the ones that aren't, it's tough.
Okay, I came up with, while we were talking, a great idea that is never, ever going to happen for the quarterback thing. And then I'll ask you the last question. What if they could only ever sign 1-year contracts and there was no cap to them? And it's just quarterbacks, but it can only be 1 year. So all the owners would have to decide, they would all become free agents the minute that the season ends. And this would be terrible for jersey sales and fans. They want their franchise quarterbacks, so it would never happen. But imagine you had to decide each year how much you were willing to pay for that quarterback to come play for you. At Mahomes every year hits free agency when the clock strikes midnight, but okay, well, somebody's going to be willing to pay him X, but what about the Dak Prescott? Like, then it becomes almost fantasy draft for quarterbacks. How much are you willing to pay? And then how much you pay takes, like, 50% of that goes onto the cap. So you can't just go, Mahomes, here's $200 million. So there's a limit there. That would be insanely interesting and fun. That was my crazy idea that would never happen.
The funny thing is, my mind doesn't even think of football ramifications. I think it literally like destabilizes local economies. Like I'm beyond even thinking of like on field or roster construction. I'm literally sitting there being like, the city of Kansas City, excuse me, would be like, all right, we got to make a lot of money this year, and we got to like make sure, because next year, like, we don't know. So like, you're like a local barbecue joint near the stadium. You're like, like it changes the lives of everyone.
Maybe there would be. All right, I'll move off this in a second, but I'm trying to think of ideas that would make football even more insane to talk about. Maybe there would be a max protection quarterback contract that you could do for multiple seasons, but it's going to cost you 25% of the cap for every year. You can't mess with it. You can't void year that thing. So you can max protect Mahomes. You can max protect Josh Allen, but everybody else is on a 1-year contract. And then you could pay him as much as you want, and it's only 50% of that ends up on the cap. That's interesting football every offseason.
You're getting there.
You think we have fun now talking about guard prices. We would really have fun then. Okay, last thing. You are a lifelong Chicago Bear follower for what reason no one truly understands. But now, this is your time. It was your time the last time, and it was your time the last time before that.
Correct.
Yeah, and then when the Cutler, that was your time when they signed him. Yeah. The Rex Grossman is our quarterback. That was your time as well. Explain to me why this is really this is the one.
You mean this obviously is like rose-colored glasses and whatnot, but I mean, none of those, we could list a dozen names, have stepped into a situation even in the same stratosphere as this one. And of course, people might quibble with like, should they have changed coaches, whatnot. The guy has DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Roma Dunze, plus like a Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, 1-2 punch at tight end, which is more than good. A stable of running backs that are solid, and the offensive line, I think at this point it should be at least average. No, like the other guys, Justin Fields' supporting cast and Mr. Trubisky's supporting cast, we're not in the same stratosphere. And now it still ultimately comes down to this individual human being and how good they can be. But yeah, that's really all we're hanging our hat on. It's just like, shoot, they've done all they need to do. You can still get better, sure, but build out a whole coaching staff around him. He's been living in a hotel with Keenan Allen for like 4 months, apparently. And it's funny because not like that.
I'm not being weird. I just thought, like, face. Wait a minute. Well, I wouldn't want
a couple of dudes grinding film.
I understand that. I wouldn't want to live with another football man for 4 months. That's like a long time.
I thought they're like sharing a room. I would imagine. I would assume
Airbnb. I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just like maybe a join. There's a door in the middle situation. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But anyway, it's just like they actually built out the whole thing to like actually support the guy. Whereas in the past, I think it literally was like, save our job. Thanks. Like that was pretty much it. It was just like please keep us employed. It doesn't feel that way at all this time around. So, hey, Bears fans, we're delusional. We probably all think we're going to win 12 games this year. Which we are. But yeah, so anyway, but no, I think it's just, if it fails this time, at least you can't blame everyone but the guy. If it fails this time, I think it's fair to blame the guy.
Yeah. When you're talking about, the past, they drafted quarterbacks and then fired the head coach. And anytime you're doing that, and this is why I have advocated for extend O'Connell, extend Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, go forward with this thing. Like, don't put pressure on this year and say, well, if this looks bad, then we're just going to change coaches. Like, give them the room that they need. And I am not saying Matt Nagy needed more room. He probably didn't. But when you draft a guy to save your butt, you should just fire that coach anyway. Okay, now the last thing. Which Chicago Bears quarterback hurt you the most?
It's the situation, not the player, but the Fields one was the hardest. I think most people would agree with this. Now, again, I wasn't on Twitter like tweeting about how he was the second coming and how Caleb Williams like paints his net because I'm not a moron. But and as an objective observer, like I realized by the end of the year, like this isn't working. And yes, the team around him is bad, but an average quarterback would have been able to kind of progress in ABC XYZ areas. And look, I'm in Pittsburgh now. I live here. I hope he kills it. Sounds like he has been killing it, and I'm rooting for him 100%. Like, that one broke me because I thought, like, I remember, like, hearing Trubisky was the pick. I know where I was. I was in New Orleans. I was like, the kid from North Carolina, like, why wouldn't they take, redacted, but still, at the time, that was my thought. I didn't know Patrick Mahomes, so I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and be like, oh, I thought Mahomes. I didn't know, but I definitely wasn't like, oh, this kid's the truth. Like, I'm a believer from jump. And then with him, I thought like mid-second season of him starting. So I remember the first game was against the Vikings, actually, if you remember. That was like week 4 of his rookie year. He came in at the end of the game, like threw a pick, and it was like, but we saw some flashes. Like so I kind of bought in a little bit. By the middle of the next year, I was like, nah, this guy's making the same mistake over and over again. With Fields, I thought he was making a lot of mistakes, but they were like it was like a different mistake each time. And so I was just like, eventually he's going to stop making all of these mistakes, but he's not making the same one over and over again a lot, at least as far as I could tell. But yeah, it was just like, you blame the supporting cast was as bad as humanly possible. He obviously had the coaching turnover you're talking about. They fire Nagy after the first year, and Pace, in that scenario. So that one to me hurt them. And then of course, like the highlights, the highs were as high can get. So anyway, like I said, rooting for him 100%. It seems like a great dude. It was not entirely his fault. But it had to be done. It was not a tough thing for me. They made the right decision. If you don't think that now, still, I don't know what you're a Justin Fields fan, not a Bears fan. That's fine. That's totally fine.
I think that because he could be so spectacular on an individual play, that was what made it difficult. How could someone who can do that then also be so bad? But
Yeah.
also, but look, when you can't clear 2,600 yards in a season passing, I don't care who your receivers are, who your coach is. No receiver who makes the NFL and no coach who makes the NFL is so bad the quarterback can't get to 3,000 yards. That would be on
today's
him.
NFL for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess I'll wish you the best with that, because I think the NFC North, if McCarthy works out, which he is on a good track so far, and Caleb Williams does, we have some serious battles to go over the future. And then I'll look forward to traveling to Chicago rather than saying, oh, Tim Boyle is starting this game against the Vikings. I guess I'll fly there to Chicago and take the 55-minute Uber ride to the stadium for Nathan Peterman. Anyway, Brad Spielberger, you're the best, man. I am super pumped for you, and I'm glad that we can still do this. That's exciting as well. But for you to take another step in your career is well earned, and I'm happy for you. And we'll talk again very soon, man.
Sounds great. Appreciate you, man.